Right now, you and I are living through an inflection point in tennis history. Novak Djokovic since pulled out of the ATP finals, Rafa is retiring in a few weeks, and the top 10 might have a totally different outlook next year. While we saw some of these things coming, I had totally different expectations from the 7 special players I watched in Paris. I could have called them the Magnificent Seven if they achieved big results, but since they didn't, I might as well call them the biggest losers at the Paris Masters. But don't take that literally. Last week in tennis was a lesson, and these are some of the biggest talking points. Most of us aren't focusing on hydration as much as we should, especially on court. SuckerPunch keeps me fueled through my training sessions and helps me get the most out of my body. Each hydration shooter is packed with electrolytes, magnesium, potassium, and calcium, key nutrients that maximize muscle performance and prevent cramps. Try a pack and get 25% off your order by using the code Courtside-Punch at checkout. I'll leave the link for you in the description down below. And be sure to let me know how it works for you. Ugo Humbert stirred the pot all tournament with what many thought was unsportsmanlike behavior. And because tennis is still, and probably always will be, a gentleman's sport, Humbert got more smoke than he bargained for. Not too long ago, we saw the Frenchman apologize to Karen Khachanov for celebrating wildly while Khachanov was down and hurt. Of course, the post was initially made in French, but if your French isn't great like mine, here's the English version, which Humbert also translated himself. Essentially, Humbert explained that he was just trying to keep himself focused with whatever he was doing, and he thinks he was misunderstood by all. To his credit, he personally reached out to Khachanov. Some fans think it was just the usual PR done to save face because of the backlash he received. But others, including myself, think that Humbert genuinely learned from his mistakes and is willing to turn over a new leaf. Reaching the final in Paris and being 2 sets away from lifting a Masters 1000 title for the first time is definitely not an L in any way, but the only reason Humbert is on this list is because he lost a lot of fans. Hopefully the lessons have been learned and he gets some of the fans back on his side in good time. But the next player I want to talk about is Tommy Paul. Paul just won the Stockholm title 3 weeks ago and he didn't drop a single set all tournament. In the final, Paul was up against a strong opponent in Grigor Dimitrov, but he came through unscathed. I thought it was going to be a springboard for some big results to end the year with. But then I was jolted back to reality when Paul took yet another L to Nakashima in Vienna. Nakashima didn't let Paul find any rhythm, and Paul ended up making 31 unforced errors in that match. At this point, it's safe to say that Tommy Paul has a Brandon Nakashima problem, because the surface doesn't even matter. Nakashima just has Paul's number. And it seems like some of you guys were really pissed at the result because y'all took it out on Paul in the deep dive I made a couple of weeks ago about him. I mean, look at some of these comments. Pretty brutal, yeah? Things then went from bad to worse when Tommy lost to Adrian Mannarino in Paris. No disrespect to Mannarino, he's been brilliant for a 36-year-old at times, and he's capable of playing at an insane level at other times. However, other than beating Shelton in the 3rd round of the Australian Open, I simply cannot remember Mannarino doing any other headline-grabbing stuff all season. Now, here's Tommy Paul still in the conversation for ATP Finals qualification at the time, losing to a guy with a 16-32 record for the season. Mannarino has lost twice as many matches as he's won this season, but somehow he was able to get rid of Paul in straights. It's understandable to see why Tommy Paul fans would be really pissed. Looking back at the match, Mannarino wasn't just taking the ball early and on the rise, he was going for broke at every possible chance, and he did this with short, compact swings, which was in stark contrast to Tommy's longer swings. You could tell that Paul was dazzled and saw none of it coming, and maybe playing in front of his home crowd stirred some extra fire in Mannarino's belly, but what a performance overall. Paul not being able to hit past Mannarino on the fast indoor hard court just reinforces the point I made about him not having any big weapons to blow out opponents. Tommy made a lot of unforced errors, about a dozen of them in fact, and he seemed to have problems anticipating where Mannarino was going to hit. The indoor conditions were favorable for Mannarino, and since we already know how flat his ground strokes could be, it was a nightmare matchup for Paul. Still, there were no excuses for what went down. It's crazy to think that Paul is 0-5 against Alex de Minaur, who fans sometimes consider to be one of the weaker members of the top 10. Just thinking, was I too optimistic about Paul's top 10 potential and staying power? I don't know, but let me know what you think. When we checked in on Grigor Dimitrov, it was a different story altogether. Dimitrov had struggled to get past Etcheverry and Rinderknecht, needing 3 sets against both players in the earlier rounds. Paris was Grigor's 5th tournament since the US Open, and we had seen him play quite a number of matches. From the look of things though, Dimitrov simply ran out of steam by the time he got to the quarterfinal where he fell to Khachanov. In his post-match interview before the Khachanov match, Dimitrov mentioned that the previous couple days had been horrible, and he wasn't ready to talk about his physical condition. He only mentioned that he was going to give everything that was left. Apparently, though, there wasn't much left in the tank, as Dimitrov looked absolutely knackered on the court. In the end, a 6-2, 6-3 win for Khachanov, and his first win against Grigor at the 5th time of asking. Let's not forget that Dimitrov got to the final in Paris last year, and the only way he could stand any chance to qualify for the ATP Finals was to go a step further than he did last year by winning the tournament. But it didn't happen, and you could sense the disappointment around his camp. If there's any consolation for Dimitrov, it's the fact that he has now won more matches than Federer or Nadal at the Paris Masters, and he's now in the top 5 for most wins all time at the tournament. Following Novak's withdrawal, Dimitrov gets to be the first alternate in Turin, and that comes with a guaranteed $155,000. Honestly, I don't think Dimitrov has been 100% healthy in the last couple weeks, but there's a particular subject I want to touch on. You see, we all love Dimitrov's backhand, but it's mostly because of the aesthetics. If we're being honest, you can't call Dimitrov's backhand a weapon. Tommy Paul exploited it in the final by peppering the backhand shot after shot. About 71% of Paul's backhands were cross-court, which is far above the tour average of 50%. Paul was trying to exploit the weaker stroke and forced Dimitrov to hit more backhands himself. And for a stroke with a backhand potency in the negative, Dimitrov typically loses more points than he wins off the backhand. On the cross-court exchanges on the backhand, Dimitrov is quick to bail out with a slice, or he would rather try to set up a forehand. The backhand topspin is just not a reliable shot, and while you can't really teach old dogs new tricks, you just wonder how Grigor is going to win another major title with a backhand that the very best in the game can exploit. Up next, we have Stefanos Tsitsipas. He got kicked out by Zverev in the quarterfinal and will now finish the year outside the top 10 for the first time since 2018. Such a bummer for the Tsitsi fans. But let's look at Tsitsipas' year as a whole. Apart from the Monte Carlo win, which was absolutely incredible, Tsitsipas actually had a subpar season. The caliber of players he's lost to all season is really mind-boggling. I mean, take a look at all his losses this season. Looking at these losses, you'll notice one thing. Tsitsipas has not only been losing to top players, he's losing a lot to a large number of players he should have been smacking. Many fans feel like Tsitsipas has a mentality problem. Looking at his game, it's the same problems we've talked about in the past. His backhand is weaker than the rest of his game, and the backhand slice in particular is, not good enough, and that's putting it lightly. Not too long ago, Tsitsipas complained about the 2-week scheduling of the Masters 1000s and how it affects players. And that's a sentiment that tennis legend Andy Roddick shares as well.
The 2-week 1000s are so stupid. They're so stupid. They're so dumb. It's the worst.
Tsitsipas thinks that making these events 2 weeks is a step backwards, and the overall quality has dropped as a result of the scheduling. That's something I totally agree with personally. Like I always say, tennis has one of the shortest off seasons in sports, and you shouldn't add to that problem by making tournaments any longer than necessary. Tsitsipas gets to be a second alternate in Turin, but he probably cares less about that. Zooming in on Stefanos himself, I think most of his problems are intertwined. You could question his motivation, confidence, shot making on the backhand, and surface-related struggles, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong in any category. I think the extra week Tsitsipas gets to have in the off-season could give him more time to work on the broken parts of his game and improve on the 45-22 win-loss record he had this year. And what about Hurkacz? When Hurkacz showed up in Paris, we didn't know which version was going to turn up. Unfortunately for us, Hubie was a shadow of his normal self in Paris. He got smoked by Alex Michelsen in the first round and only managed to win 4 games the whole match. Hurkacz faced 13 breakpoints and got broken a total of 4 times. Let's just say that everything that could go wrong did. Missed shots, a non-existent second serve, and a disastrous return. Reflecting on his 2024 season on his Instagram with a lot of perspective, Hurkacz is already looking forward to a revenge tour next season. This season wasn't exactly the best for him. Although he surpassed 40 wins for a 3rd consecutive time, Hurkacz struggled with finding consistency, and fitness became an issue in the later part of the season too. For a long time, Hurkacz was literally the worst returner in the top 10 before he got kicked out. And I should mention that at 27 years old, Hurkacz still has a lot of room for improvement in his game. Footwork and movement could get better. The forehand in particular could also use a facelift. Looking back in retrospect at the stunt he pulled off a couple months ago, we can all agree that coming back from injury so early was questionable, and at this point, we can only look forward to a better 2025 for the Pole. Matteo Berrettini is yet another guy whose run in Paris wasn't what he hoped for. He got kicked out by Popyrin in the first round, and it got me thinking, what should we really be expecting from Berrettini at this point? The fitness has gotten a lot better, and this year, Berrettini played almost twice as many matches as he did last year. He has a 30-12 record this season, which leaves him at a 71.4 match win percentage for the year. On top of that though, he has 3 titles this season in Marrakesh, Gstaad, and Kitzbühel. But in his last 7 tournaments, Berrettini has only made it past the second round once, which happened to be his quarterfinal run in Vienna. Currently at world number 35, Berrettini is only a few spots away from being seeded at the Australian Open, and that might very well be one of his priorities because in many of his early round exits this year, he faced tough opponents and was simply unlucky with the draw at times. But even before then, the immediate goal would be to make the cut at the Davis Cup in a few weeks. He still hopes to convince Italy coach Filippo Volandri to select him alongside Yannick Sinner and Flavio Cobolli for the Davis Cup. Let me say this though, Berrettini's comeback season has been incredible, especially considering where he was last year with a ruptured ankle ligament at the US Open and a torn oblique muscle earlier in the year which thwarted his plans. Berrettini recently split with Rafa Nadal's former coach Francisco Roig a couple days ago. He had been working with Roig since December 2023, but decided to end things amicably. At this point in his career, does he really need a high-profile coaching partnership, and do you see him eventually becoming a top 10, top 15 player once again? Also, what areas of improvement are you looking to see Berrettini make in his game? The footwork? The backhand? Those are the usual suspects to me. Last but not least, we have Medvedev, who, like Berrettini, got beaten by Pop the Giant Slayer. Popyrin is now 6-4 against top 10 players this year, and he's won 5 of his last 6 matches against the top 10 guys. Popyrin is fast developing a reputation for being a big game player, and you could tell that some folks will not be too embarrassed losing to him at this point. In a way, Medvedev was the architect of his own doom in Paris because his serving allergies were acting up again. To start with, he had 14 double faults all match. That's almost 4 games he gave away on a complete charity donation. Even when the serves were getting in, they weren't doing as much damage as they normally would too. But the big question I have is this. I have no doubt that Medvedev will eventually find solutions to his serving problem, but even if he gets back to the insane 2021 or 2022 version of himself, you start to ask yourself if it's going to be good enough to compete with the likes of Sinner and Alcaraz. Now that's a conversation to have. And if you were wondering why Medvedev didn't have the warmest of handshakes with Pop at the net, it could simply be because he was a little upset he narrowly lost the match, or because Popyrin was screaming a lot and threw a tantrum when a dodgy call by the linesman was made in the 3rd set. I can't say for sure. In addition to fixing his serve, Medvedev would be looking to get a confidence boost because it seems like he's running a bit low on confidence at the moment. I think the numerous losses to Sinner and Alcaraz haven't helped, and also the fact that he hasn't won a title in ages. And to make things worse, Medvedev is now going to have to face Sinner at the ATP Finals. Their head-to-head is currently level at 7-all, and Sinner will have the chance to take the lead for the first time. Unfortunately, I just don't see a way out for Medvedev. If Rublev or Ruud had missed out on qualifying for Turin, they would have probably been on this list, but at the end of the day, their early losses didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Alcaraz also gets a pass because he's still figuring out how to play best on the fast indoor hard courts, so it's not like many of us were expecting him to go all out and win the title. Oh, and by the way, I just made a video on Alcaraz explaining why 2024 has been his best season so far. If you haven't seen it, be sure to check it out. Many of the losses we've talked about in this video exemplify just how difficult it is to consistently achieve great results all year round in tennis. These guys have the ability to achieve big results in any tournament, but for various reasons, it just didn't happen in Paris. The ATP Finals is now here, and I couldn't be more excited. A huge thanks to SuckerPunch for sponsoring this video. If you haven't already tried the hydration shooters during your workouts or your time on court, do so and let me know how they work for you. Use my code Courtside-Punch at checkout for 25% off your order. If you loved this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for all the action coming your way here on Courtside Tennis. We have a lot of great content coming your way, from coverage of the ATP Finals to a few feel-good stories from around the tennis world that are guaranteed to make you smile. Until next time, keep going for the lines.